Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
Hello and welcome to Living on the Edge, and a Merry Christmas to all our viewers from our team. As you can see, we've decided to abandon the formality of the studio and get closer to the source of inspiration for our series. We've also decided to make a few changes in our program, keeping in view suggestions received from our viewers across the country. In fact, much of what you'll see from this week onwards will be determined by what you want to watch. This week, this is what we have. We travel to Patancheru in Andhra Pradesh to see why one of Asia's largest industrial areas is setting almost disastrous standards in pollution. We visit Bihar to investigate why certain areas have an almost frightening incidence of leprosy, spend time with this animal to see if he's really guilty of all the faults we attribute to him, and examine the global impact of acid rain. Christmas is said to be a time of good cheer, when quarrels are forgotten and people band together in an atmosphere of goodwill and harmony. But for the inhabitants of Patancheru, 50 kilometers outside Hyderabad, this Christmas will be like any other. Afflicted by ever-increasing pollution that is destroying their health, their agriculture and their sustenance, their plight is almost pitiable. All their protests have gone unheeded. They even attempted to storm the State Assembly and move the High Court, but to no avail. So when Dr. Kishan Rao of Patancheru wrote to us asking us to investigate, Sunil Manoharan decided to take up the challenge. Here's his report.
Besides being residents of the same area, these ailing villagers have one more thing in common. They are all victims of industrial pollution. Till 1980, Patancheru in Medak district, where they live, was a small sleepy town. But over a period of time, it was transformed into the industrial hub of Andhra Pradesh. Today, it's one of the biggest industrial centers in Asia with over 100 chemical units. And that doesn't include new concerns mushrooming at nearby Krishnapur, Kagipali and Bolaram. All these units could have safeguarded the health of thousands living in the vicinity and protected the environment too, if only they had installed effluent treatment plants. Instead, they let their waste run into lakes and rivers and onto agricultural land. Groundwater contamination is a logical consequence. The area around the plant is so degraded that it's literally called descent into hell.
The groundwater is polluted up to the depth of 140 feet. Wherever, not only at Patancheru, to the radius of 30 kilometers downstream of this Nakavagu. And the Nakavagu joins to the main Manjira river. The Manjira river in turn joins the Nizam Sagar. Nizam Sagar in turn let out water into the Godavari.
Take the Bolaram industrial area for example. Effluents here flow directly into agricultural fields and irrigation channels. Even wells, hundreds of years old, are full of chemicals. Not surprisingly, plots such as this, which once produced a quintal of rice each year, have been rendered useless. Today the fields produce only husk, not rice.
ఈ తాళవంచం ఈ అప్పులను కోయాలన్నా మేము కడుపుకు తిరాలన్నా పిల్లలను నడుపుకోవాలన్నా ఏం బాధ పడాలి ఎట్లా చేయాలి
Worse still, farmers have been forced to abandon irrigation from groundwater sources. as pollution has reached a depth of 140 feet. Add to that pollution of the Nokuvagu, a seasonal river which once provided water for drinking and irrigation. Over 2,000 acres of agricultural land near the river have been rendered uncultivable because of high chemical levels in the water. As a result, 1,500 families have been forced to migrate.
इससे पहले बाउली में अच्छा रहता था, मीठा पानी रहता था। ये नागर NSL का पानी जब छोड़ना शुरू करे तो पानी पूरा ख़राब हो जाए। हम बाउली में भी ऐसे हो गया, बाउली का पानी भी पिए तो ऐसे होता, मुंह में अगर डाल लिया जल्दी ऑटोमेटिक वो बाहर निकल जाता, वो अंदर अपन कोशिश करे तो भी अंदर नहीं जाता वो।
The roots of the problem go back to the late 80s when over 5,000 cattle died after drinking polluted water. But of all the consequences of industrial pollution, the impact on human health has been particularly disastrous.
తొమ్మిది అయినాక కూడా కడుపులో ఒక పిల్లగాడు కింద పడ్డం కూడా పిల్లగాడు చచ్చిపోయాడు. కడుపులో ఇద్దరు ముగ్గురు వైరి ఈతలో ఇద్దరు ముగ్గురు అయ్యారు.
पेट में दर्द आके इसमें से पूरा यहाँ से नीचे ऐसा आके पेट फूल गया बाद में पेशाब पैखाना दो बंद हो गए बाद हॉस्पिटल गए तो ऑपरेशन करे। वो ऑपरेशन कराए बाद में निकला एक गड्ढा। वो गड्ढा क्या है बोले तो ये पानी से फिल्टर होके जैसा होके यहाँ गड्ढा बन गया। वो पानी का पूरा असर निकल के तुमको गड्ढा बन गया। वो गड्ढे को हम निकाल दिए।
Mutaiya is another victim of chemical pollution. 10 years ago, he had a permanent job with BHEL, but the inadvertent consumption of chemical effluent has devastated his life. He has lost his job, and his wife has deserted him, unable to come to grips with his almost macabre transformation. In addition, villagers who drink the water are known to suffer from chronic bronchitis, mental disorders, psychosis, erratic menstrual cycles, growth retardation, and blood cancer. When living on the edge, visited the area, we found no dearth of industrialists trying to convince us that they were not responsible for the pollution. Take the Voltas plant for instance. Methyl cyanide, similar to what was produced by the Union Carbide plant in Bhopal, is handled here. When we raised this question and asked to see the plant, company managers showed us their rose garden instead, as proof of environmental consciousness. The ETP, which we wanted to see, was out of bounds, they said, as their competitors may get a peek at their secret technology.
Absolutely no basis either for the site to become a Chernobyl, because we don't deal in any radioactive materials, nor can it be a Bhopal, because the gases which are handled in Bhopal are totally different.
Is there any disaster management plan?
We have already an on-site emergency plan in case of any event occurring. Then we have a complete plan as to who will deal with the crisis and how they will be positioned inside the plant and how to take care of the emergent site.
How Mr. Ramalingam can reconcile a disaster management plan with a risk he says doesn't exist is anybody's guess. Strangely enough, the Pollution Control Board, that is supposed to check effluent treatment and hold the companies to account, is on hunger strike. They're demanding regularization of employment and standardization of pension. The irony of the staff demanding more emoluments when their work has been almost criminally neglectful seems to have escaped everyone.
At present, because the work has come to standstill, the industries, they don't follow the norms prescribed to them. They don't operate their control equipment. They don't operate their ETPs or the emission control equipment. So the water pollution and air pollution that is causing a lot of problems.
It's unlikely that pollution will be controlled even if the demands of the hunger strikers are met. Even the envisaged common treatment plant for the industries isn't working, as it was wrongly designed. A fact even the former Environment Minister accedes to.
I was very unhappy when this kind of a plan was made earlier, because what should have been done was a modular sort of a plan. You come up and this is what becomes very necessary. But
now, who's responsible for these kind of lapses?
No, because what has happened, the different agencies were involved in it. So that is one aspect that has to be looked into it.
It was in these circumstances that local inhabitants initiated legal action against the polluting industries in 1986. the High Court ordered the closure of 12 plants, but the industrialists have found a way around it.
We have appealed 13 times in the court of law. We have exhibited all the food and crops and cattle in the court, High Court of Andhra Pradesh. So ultimately we were, instead of taking care of us, they have harassed us, they have booked false cases against us.
It's apparent that environmental degradation and the consequent adverse impact on human health cannot be willed away. In fact, it can only worsen as long as successive governments fail to hold polluting industries accountable. These plants have defied court orders in willful disregard of human health and welfare. The question is, will it take a disaster of the magnitude of Bhopal to shake everyone out of their lethargy? Or will the benefit of hindsight lead to early remedial action?
Speaking about action, it's only when conservation becomes a people's movement, as it's become elsewhere, that we will be able to turn the tide. That means losing our indifference and bringing environmental problems to the notice of the authorities. From Patancheru, we turn to the plight of leprosy patients. Shunned by society, they eke out an existence by begging. Even when we do give them money, we make sure not to touch them because we're not sure how the disease spreads. And yet, India accounts for half the leprosy patients in the world. Of late, studies have shown that the environment in which people live has a direct bearing on the incidence of the disease. Contaminated water and unhealthy and unclean surroundings fuel its spread. Priya Sumaya visited several remote villages in South Bihar, where a group of voluntary workers is spreading awareness about the disease and treating patients.
In our Indian literature, they said it's kushta, the eating away of the flesh. And even in biblical times, it's written in the Old Testament that people, if leprosy patient has to pass away, he has to ring a bell, unclean, unclean. And because of all those deformities, people have been put outside the city, they have been put in the jails also, so that isolate the patients, they thought we'll be able to prevent the spread of the disease.
For centuries, there was no cure for this dreaded disease. Ostracism of leprosy patients was seen as a logical step to prevent infection of other people. But once the bacteria that caused leprosy was isolated, a number of drugs became available. 10 years ago, there were an estimated 12 million cases worldwide. Today, the figure has fallen to 2.5 million. 50-year-old Ramnath was forced to leave his job when his employees discovered he had leprosy. Over the years, his body has been slowly wasting away, and his deformity became obvious and debilitating. There are over 1 million leprosy patients in India. We account for over half of all cases worldwide. Although leprosy is curable and the number of patients is gradually declining, the plight of the afflicted in rural areas is pitiable. Take Bihar, for instance, which is one of the most affected states, with an average of 38 cases per 10,000. Poverty, lack of awareness, and environmental factors have only worsened the plight of victims and prevented effective remedial action. It's no coincidence that the disease is most rampant in remote villages which lack access to clean drinking water. Local wells and ponds are often too contaminated for human use, but villagers have no alternative. Add to that unhygienic living conditions, and you have the root of the problem.
The leprosy bacilli can live outside the body for a few days, and it can thrive there. And if the environment is not good, the sanitation conditions are not good, the water is not good, it plays a part in the person's immunity. The immunity goes down. And leprosy bacilli is an opportunistic bacilli, waiting for a person to attack if the immunity is low. That is why when people are exposed to lepra bacilli, not everyone gets the disease. Only about 2% of the people get it if their immunity is low.
In these circumstances, it was heartening to find a voluntary group called the Bharat Sevashram Sangh working with patients. Aided by the government, the group adopted over 600 villages in South Bihar, where large tribal populations have been exposed to and are susceptible to the disease.
ऐसे कुष्ठ रोग का बहुत पेशेंट हम लोग पाते हैं। हम लोग हर गांव में करीब एक महीना में 10 गांव, 15 गांव, 20 गांव घूमते हैं और घूमने के बाद क्या चलता है, करीब 300 आदमी में से 15 केस पाते हैं।
Perhaps the greatest challenge voluntary workers face is the stigma attached to the disease. Often those infected are thrown out of their village. Fear and shame prevents them from seeking treatment, and this actually fuels the spread of the disease. This is because it's in the early stages that one type of leprosy is highly infectious. Contrary to popular belief that it is only when a person develops sores and deformities that he is likely to spread the disease. Over a year ago, Mukul Sajjan first discovered patches and nodules on his face and body. It was after being identified by the local paramedic that medication for his disease began, and the results that followed are for all to see.
প্রথম ওইটা জানি করি জ্বর আসি গেল, জ্বর আসি করি বেতা গায়ে বেতা হয়, ওই জন্য আমি গেলি উঠি।
Like Mukul Sajjan, over 13,000 people have been cured over the past 5 years. Here in the hospital at Debanki, patients are not only treated for the symptoms, but also counseled to help them reintegrate into society once they are cured. But often, even a completely cured patient finds that acceptance of the community is not forthcoming.
ऐसा ही घटना घटा एक गांव में एक लेप्रोसी पेशेंट अच्छा होने के बाद जब घर वापस गया, उनका घर जला दिया। रात में सोए थे तो हम लोग फौरन उससे नेक्स्ट डे पहुंचा, गांव का आदमी को समझाया। अब खुशी होगा अभी उसी गांव में उसी जगह में उनका घर हम लोग बना रहे हैं।
In the end, it's only the spread of awareness that will help conquer the shame and fear that leprosy patients labor under. For many of the women who've come to this ward, the future holds no consolation, as they have been abandoned by their husbands and families. And yet, there is a glimmer of hope, as the younger generation are more willing to understand and accept this affliction as just another disease and one that is curable. And it is this acceptance that can transform the future of 14-year-old Shanti and many others like her.
That was Priya Somaya on the problems of leprosy patients, who more than anything else yearn to be accepted as human beings. Is that so difficult? That's a question that can only be answered by our viewers, whose letters reflect a yearning to do things that help conservation and protect the environment. Well, here in the first part of a new series within the program, Nandini Rajwade takes a look at an animal that lives and sleeps on the roads. Frequently ill-treated and mostly avoided, he's said to be vicious and a carrier of several diseases. Here's a profile inspired by letters from Vanessa Coutinho of Goa and Ahmed Saqib of Varanasi, of an animal most of us care little about. And yet, a change in attitude can overturn decades of prejudice.
Tubby, a stray dog who once wandered around Delhi's defense colony, now lives with Friendicos, an agency that adopts unwanted animals. He was rescued from a family who had tied him to a car and driven over a flyover at 40 kilometers an hour. Such bizarre instances are not rare. Roger had his leg broken and was blinded in one eye for biting a child in the neighborhood. Cruelty to animals in general, and stray dogs in particular, is a growing trend. But what is it about stray dogs that clouds our perception and permits us to perpetrate cruelty that is almost shocking? For over 40 years, stray dogs have been almost viciously exterminated by municipal departments. The reason? They spread rabies. The reality is that not all dogs are infected. A rabid dog is easily identified by bloodshot staring eyes and foam at his mouth. In recognition of this, the government in July '93 put an end to the killing of dogs by electrocution and poisoning. Instead, large-scale immunization and sterilization is being carried out to safeguard public health. If you are worried about disease, remember that a vaccinated stray dog is likely to be a loyal and faithful watchdog who can survive on virtually anything. A pedigreed pet, on the other hand, involves an investment of thousands each year. Stray dogs are believed to be ill-natured, vicious and unpredictable. This is far from true, except perhaps during the mating season, which lasts for 2 months a year. Besides, there is always a reason behind the transformation of a friendly neighborhood dog into a vicious beast. A bitch's pup could have been killed, or a dog provoked by unnecessary teasing. Far from being useless, they are actually the best known exterminators of rodents, superior to even cats. Dogs are territorial, which means they seldom allow other animals to enter their area. Besides, they also function as community watchdogs in a way most of us do not realize. So the next time you encounter unwarranted ill treatment of stray dogs, remember, there are laws protecting man's oldest canine friend. You can actually lodge a complaint with the nearest police station or the local Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Better still, you can adopt a stray dog or sponsor a vaccination or even a day's feeding. These dogs may not be pedigreed, but they're as deserving of affection and acceptance and far less demanding than well-known, better-looking breeds. Beauty, after all, lies in the eyes of the beholder.
So the next time you pick up a stone to chase a stray dog away, pause for a moment. That's all it takes. Our next story is a result of several letters from our younger viewers, particularly the persistent Pulab of Assam and Sandhya Prabha Devi of Goa. Here in a new series that seeks to simplify complex environmental problems, Sunil Manoharan examines the global impact of acid rain.
Acid rain as an expression covers rain, snow, fog and sleet. In fact, it covers all precipitation that is acidic in nature. In fact, all rain is acidic in nature because carbon dioxide in the atmosphere reacts with water to form carbonic acid. But the degree of acidity varies from place to place. The higher the acidity, the greater the danger to life on Earth. This is a pH scale, which measures the acidity and alkalinity of substances. From 6 on the scale descending to 0, the acidity gets worse. This means that a substance at 1 is far more acidic than another at 6. 7 is considered neutral, and upwards of that, readings are alkaline. 14 is the maximum you can get for alkalinity. Each point on the scale represents a 10-fold increase over the previous point. The acid in acid rain comes from sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide emitted from burning wood. These pollutants combine with gaseous water in the clouds and change to acids, sulfuric and nitric acid. At this point, rain and snow wash these acids from the air. The effects of this can be seen in the United States, Germany, the Netherlands and Australia, and is becoming a problem in Japan, China and Southeast Asia. Rain with a pH of 4.5 has been reported in China. But what are the consequences of acid rain? Lakes, streams, bays and ponds become increasingly acidic until all fish and other aquatic creatures can't survive anymore. Gradually the water food chain gets disrupted and below 4.5 all fish die. Besides, soil fertility decreases and trees, crops and other vegetation deteriorate. In Western Europe, huge forests are dying because of acid rain. Buildings and monuments also get damaged, and toxic metals can leak into groundwater. Added to all this, toxic metals like lead, zinc, copper, chromium and aluminium get deposited on the earth and can have disastrous and unforeseen consequences. Although India is not really affected by acid rain at present, our sulfur dioxide emissions from factories and plants have trebled since the 60s. We just have to take a look at the Taj to see what acid rain is beginning to do. This means that we could become affected in a big way in the coming decades. Besides, environmental problems cannot be confined to geographic boundaries but affect the world as a community.
$250 million tons a year is extracted as fuel wood from our forests. At this rate, there will be no forests left in 50 years.